I must have seen the Lion King movie literally dozens of times over the years, because Hollywood and Disney really know how to tell a story. And if you want to be seen as a true professional and a great speaker, you must learn how to deliver your presentation and your key points through stories. So in this presentation, this video, I'm going to share with you my secret storytelling system that may one day see you sharing the stage with some of the best known speakers in the world and making massive amounts of money in back of the room sales. So if you haven't done so already, please go and grab a pen and a paper right now, because you're going to want to make plenty of notes throughout this presentation, so go and do that right now. Now, there are over 12 steps in the secret storytelling system, and today I'm going to give you the essence of that so you can start using it immediately. The first thing I want to share with you is something that Hollywood considers extremely important and pays millions to make sure they get right. Imagine now watching your best ever movie, but it's got a white screen behind the actors and there is no scene whatsoever. That is exactly what it feels like to most audience members when they listen to an inexperienced presenter telling their stories. There's no scene. So what you must be able to do is to paint pictures in the mind for your audience, because the audience will remember more what they see when you say it than anything you say. Most speakers think that the audience can see what's in their head, and they're telling their story from that vantage point. The audience have an empty picture, and that's no good. So what you must be able to do is use great descriptive language. Look, I know you have a television, and you probably wouldn't dare watch television in black and white today because it would be boring. Instead, you watch it in colour. Perhaps you even have a high definition television, maybe even 3D. Why do we pay you so much money to have those kind of resources? Because it's more entertaining. And right now, for many speakers, they might as well be speaking in black and white, because all they're doing is really telling the facts. They don't paint the picture. They don't make the characters and they don't make the scene stand out. Consider the difference between these two openings. I was driving my car down the road and suddenly my car was hit from behind. And there was my car now being thrown down the road more than 50 metres. Sounds okay, doesn't it? But let me ask you a question. Did you make a picture of the car in your mind? Did you make a picture of the road? Did you make a picture of the incident itself? Probably not. Let's bring it now into colour HD 3D. If you had been sat beside me when I drove my old blue Vauxhall Cavalier down Brown Hill Road on a cool, crisp winter's morning, you'd have been about to witness something that might just have changed your life too. Wow! Suddenly you can see the image. Did you make a picture of the car? Probably. You know it's old, you know it's blue, you know it's a Vauxhall Cavalier if you know what one of those are. And more importantly, you've also sat in that car, which means you as the viewer, you as the audience member are in the scene. And that's the key component. We don't want our audience to be dissociated, looking in voyeuristically on what's going on. We want them to be in the driving seat, literally in this case. We want them to be right there with us. So what I did is I used a you-focused statement at the very beginning, meaning if you had been sat beside me, look at that. Immediately it means the story's about you rather than me only, which now makes it more interesting for you because you're there in the seat. You see, the first time I told the story when I said, I was driving my car down the road. Well, car and road is too vague, so you don't bother making a picture. And you're probably also outside of the car looking in, which makes it feel like things happened in the past, which makes it a little bit less interesting than if it's happening right now, this moment. Because what you want the audience to do is feel that the whole thing is unfolding in front of their eyes, right there in the seminar room, right there at home on their screen on their computer if you're using it in video, for example. So that's what you must be able to do. Number one is to set the scene by using a you-focused statement and using good descriptive language. Save your scene, I like to say, meaning S-A-V-E, save. First, can you use any smells in the scene? I could, for example, have brought in the smell of the exhaust fumes perhaps. Auditory, I could have brought in the sound of the car, or the sound of the exhaust pipe rattling would have made it even more of a scene for you to get into. I could have, for example, brought in the visuals, which you know that we did. We used old blue Vauxhall Cavalier. I gave a name to the road, which made it feel like it was more real. And emotions, which we brought in there at the end with the hook that I gave you. You may have been able to witness something that might have changed your life too. The next element in the storytelling system is something that Hollywood pays millions for. The very best stories, the very best movies, also have the very best actors. You know the number one issue with most people's stories? There are no characters in the stories. You see, a story can be told from two perspectives. Number one, it can be told from the perspective of narration, somebody telling a report of what's going on. Imagine watching your very best movie. Just think about your best movie you know. Imagine watching the entire thing and we turn down the soundtrack, there is no music and there are no speech. And all we do over the top is place somebody narrating over the top, telling you what's happening as it happens. Boring! You're probably going to switch off really, really quickly. And that is exactly what most audiences are doing. They are literally dying in their seats as most speakers are telling their old boring story the way that any old narration could do it. The problem with narration is, as you talk about it, it's always in the past. It's a bit like, imagine watching your favourite sport. And what happens is, you watch the action, and rather than have live commentary, they stick the commentary in after the fact. And it's like, oh, and there's a goal. It goes in. It's boring because it's narrating what's happening rather than feel it happening in the moment it happens. So in order for that to be effective, you've got to have stars in your movie. You've got to have stars in your story. Now, there are many things that your stars in the story must do. But I'm going to tell you just one. And that is that your stars must have speech. They've got to have dialogue. There's no point in stars having any part in the movie unless they say something. Because without that, you see, there's no point in them being there at all. A story is best told through the characters in the story as it unfolds. Consider the difference between these two openings, these two parts of a story. I wanted to be a speaker. And so after making the decision to become a great speaker and change people's lives, I ran all the way home as fast as I could. I opened the door and there was my mum and my dad. And I told them I wanted to become a great speaker. Sorry, yes, well, back with you. Yeah, it's pretty boring, isn't it, speaking that way? Because it's all like just, saying from a sort of third-party standpoint. It doesn't really work. Instead, if I said this. So I decided I want to become a speaker. I remember running home and saying to myself inside, I just can't wait to tell my mum and dad what I've decided. Finally, I found myself, I found the place that I want to be in the world and how I'm going to add value. I ran home and I opened the door and there stood my mum and there stood my dad. My dad now, about the same height as me, black hair, flecks of grey. And my dad was the sort of person never really ever said he was proud, never showed any of his emotions. Dad, I've decided I want to change people's lives by becoming a speaker. Nothing. Silent. And then my dad said something that stays with me even to today. Andy, it's about time. I'm very proud of you, son. Wow, 3D movie. Suddenly it's a lot more interesting to listen to, isn't it, when you hear the whole scene unfolding through the characters' responses and how they communicate together. That is what you must start to do in your stories. Consider who could be the main characters in the story and how can you give them the best lines. Sometimes You might want the audience to get a point, but the point you want to give them might actually be said through someone's dialogue rather than by you narrating or them making your point later on. Sometimes you can give the best lines to some of the other characters in your story. Does that make sense? Good. Make sure you do it then. All right, let's get on to our next point. The next essential element in the storytelling system is so important that if it's there, it will transform the movie. If it's not there, you can have the best stars, you can have the best dialogue, you can have the best script, and unfortunately the movie will fall flat on its backside. What is it? Well, what is the one element that every single story that's ever been told has in it? I can tell you it's a struggle. Some type of conflict between the character and other characters, or even the character and themselves, an inner struggle, an inner conflict. Well, we watched The Lion King earlier today, and if you remember, there was a number of struggles that Simba went through throughout the story of The Lion King. First, well, there was this conflict where he and Nala went to the wrong place. They went somewhere they shouldn't. They end up going to the elephant's graveyard, and suddenly the hyenas were upon them, and there was this whole kind of conflict evolved, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, Mufasa came and solved the problem. But of course, you'll realise the biggest conflict of this story was the inner conflict that Simba felt because his father died, and his uncle Scar had told him it was his fault. And because he believed it, he ran away, trying to run away from himself. Of course, you and I know we can't do that. We can't run away from our problems. He was trying to run away from his past. And ultimately, that whole conflict built and built and built throughout the entire movie until there's a moment where he had to make a new decision. So think about this. You must never have a scene in your movie, ever, unless it has a conflict within it. Otherwise, there's no point in that scene being there in the first place. We don't have an hour and a half to tell our story. So we can't have a scene that kind of sets up the next one. Every scene that we go to must have a conflict. One of the best pieces of advice I could give you is to get to the conflict, get to the struggle quicker in your stories, because you'll grab the audience's attention much faster when you do that, and they'll be on the edge of their seats. Why? Because what is so important about the struggle and what is so important about the conflict is we as people watching it, the audience, are gripped by the strategies and the tactics and the ideas that people in the story come up with, the character's story. How will they deal with this? They're kind of, oh, what's going to happen next? Because it raises questions in their minds. And when the audience have questions, it makes them eager for those answers. It keeps them in the story itself, captivated attention. So make sure that you have a good conflict in your story, a good struggle, get to it quicker, and make sure it builds and builds and builds throughout the story until you get to that critical point where something has to give. Now, the final step in the secret storytelling system is, I think, perhaps the most important. And even though it's the final step, it's the one that you probably should begin with. Now, when I say that, I don't mean you begin with it in terms of saying it in your story, but your story creation must begin with this. I call it the seed of the story itself. This is the takeaway. This is the payoff. This is essentially something you say at the very end of your story that sums up everything you've just said in a phrase that's maybe 10 to 12 words or less that really hits home in the heart and the minds of the audience. It makes the message sticky. It means that your message is memorable and they get to take it home with them. So it might be something like, one of my takeaway phrases that I've used in some of my stories is, so in life, you either get one of two things. Either you have problems or you have goals. A nice little memorable phrase. Tony Robbins has phrases that he uses, phrases like, if you can't, you must. Or it's in our moments of decision that our destiny is shaped. And that's the real message. You see, the point that we've made in our model, which may be one or two words, that's not really the message. The real message is the seed that you sow at the very end of your story. Because what you're hopefully trying to achieve is to install a key belief in the minds of your audience. Because as speakers, we have to change people's beliefs. And when we do that effectively, people act upon those beliefs, which means they'll take new action and, of course, most importantly, get new results, which is exactly what they came for and why they heard you speak in the first place. So that is the secret storytelling system. And there are many aspects to it, some of which I didn't get the chance to cover today. At the Public Speakers University, we cover this in great detail. You'll get the chance to perfect your stories and get feedback from either myself or some of the very best speakers in the world on your performance. Now, in the next video in this series, I'm going to be sharing with you something that's essential if you want to make it long-term in the business. I'm going to be demonstrating to you how to sell as a speaker. Because if you want to make big money, then you've got to learn how to sell consistently enough to get your message out there through products, through services and seminars, or whatever medium you've chosen to get your message out to the wider audience. Now, I want your comments. I'd like to have your feedback on this storytelling system that we've been talking about today. If you have a presentation coming up, then tell me how you're going to use this to make your performance better and to really get your message and your most key points driven home into the hearts and the minds of your audience. So please go ahead and write some comments or questions below this, and in the next video in this series, I'm going to teach you how to be a great salesperson as a speaker too. So I look forward to seeing you then, and until then, as always, I wish you all the wealth and happiness in the world.